Welcome to episode 6 of the Comms Coffee Club podcast. I'm your host and MD and founder of Comms Search and Selection, Max Forsyth, the executive search and recruitment agency for the in-house communications market, covering the UK and US markets. Delighted to have on the podcast this week the brilliant Michael Osborne, who takes us through his comms journey, starting out at Durham University when he was on the student newspaper, through to working agency side for Fishburn Hedges, with some real blue chip clients across sectors, with the likes of JP Morgan, through to his time where he spent most of his in-house comms career at the Magic Circle law firm Clifford Chance. And we cover everything from what a great PR campaign looks like, right through to working with incredibly bright, but also sometimes quite challenging senior partners, managing partners, and lawyers at a Magic Circle law firm, and what he thinks the future of communications holds, not just as an industry, but also with technology and the rise of AI. So yeah, it's a really great conversation. I hope you enjoy it. And of course, if you do, please remember to like and subscribe on YouTube and follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, if you wish to, you can also join our Patreon, which starts at £5 a month and gets you exclusive access to additional content, events, and also there'll be ad-free listening when adverts come along. So yeah, without further ado, here we go. Hi, Michael Osborne. Welcome to the Comms Coffee Club podcast. Great to have you.
Thank you for having me, Max. Great to be here.
How did you get into communications?
I think, like a lot of people, it was probably a bit of an accident. I from my sins, decided to study law. But when I was at Durham University, in the middle of all of that, found myself doing a lot of promotion work for one of the big student societies. And suddenly I had a 5-figure budget to produce brochures and posters. So I did that for a year or two for joining a student newspaper, and then parlaying it into a bit of experience in advertising, a bit of work in desktop publishing, and redesigning a student law review that we all used to get.
Great.
And, at the end of my degree, thought, oh, this was quite good fun. I've learned a lot, and maybe I'd like to work in advertising. Unfortunately, I decided this just as 9/11 happened and the entire advertising industry crashed, and there was no recruitment at all. So the necessity being the mother of invention, I discovered this little industry called PR, which I'd just never heard of before, and discovered that there were a whole bunch of people out there advocating, arguing, debating.
Yes.
For money, and frankly, that was something I was already doing for free. So I thought, well, this could be an interesting thing to explore as a job. So that's really how it started.
And then the first agency you went to, was there a particular focus, or was it anything and everything?
It was a really small agency. It was a very strange one, actually. They had started out in PR and grown into an events company. And I'd actually highly recommend working in a small agency for the reason that you at a very young age get an awful lot of responsibility. In fact, the management philosophy of some of my managers is what I describe as benign neglect. And in a strange way, I feel like I probably learned the most under some of those people.
Yes.
They just take that step back and throw out a sense of direction, and then say, well, you figure it out. Whereas most, some of the other managers be a bit more hands-on and would almost make you more risk averse. So
yes,
it's a small agency where you're given a lot of client exposure early on. It's a great way to just accelerate your learning curve by making a few hopefully low stakes mistakes along the way.
Yeah. And can you remember what one of the first campaigns was when you were training at the deep end and it was sink or swim?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably one of two very briefly that stick out in the memory. One was working with a stock picker, And one afternoon I was in the office and I saw this news breaking live about Philip Green wanting to take over Marks and Spencer.
Yes.
And I checked in with the stockbroker. We weren't conflicted, and he had positions in retail, and it was important for him to be seen as an expert on the market.
Yes.
So we got a comment out within probably half an hour or something, and that perspective on this story, which was so big, went right across the national and international business media, and very quickly became a go-to commentator on the issue. We'd established ourselves at the start, and it was just keeping it going from there on. It was very low effort. I think I learned a lot from that in terms of the importance of being quick and being relevant, and seeing the difference between being there in an hour versus even half an hour.
Yes.
The other thing that really struck me with one of my managers was we were working on a big piece of research for a professional services outsourcing advisor, and I thought this could be a good Economist story. He's a big fan of The Economist, and he's very, very cagey. He said, if you're going to approach The Economist, well, first of all, don't. But second of all, if you insist, don't call them, just email them. This struck me as an odd approach. So I sort of went off and ignored him and just called The Economist. And long story short, by the end of a few conversations, I was swapping lunch tips with this regional editor of The Economist. We were getting big feature pieces, and I learned something about taking risks, I think. The importance of taking calculated risks in what we do. I think if you're a little bit edgy, both in how we do what we do and also the stories we tell, and calibrate that right, we tend to have much greater impact. It was really old fashioned. We had I don't even remember the name. We had some prehistoric media contact database. And I was just hitting the business desks generically initially, and then very quickly following up personally with the retail editors and the business editors. Just hitting the phones really. It was a very old-fashioned sell-in, and be quite targeted. So a bit of distribution, but also who are the really important people here? Who's got an editor screaming at them? Cover this now, and just making those contacts and those relationships.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, no, and those would have been the days when when sort of print newspapers still very much in its heyday, and as soon as the late afternoon approaches, and and then it gets into the evening and stuff starts getting a bit heated in the newsrooms, and people start getting very tense over the next day's edition.
The fact it was a couple of hours before the end of the working day was meaningful then, when there was just one real deadline for most of the papers.
Yeah, nice, smashing. Yeah, and then from there you went on to Fishburn.
Yeah, which was completely different. And I learned so much there about workplace culture, and also just working with a totally different type of client. So I remember in the first week of the job on one of my financial services clients, this message came in from the client, and I was used to this old school approach where something would come in, it would go to the manager, they would decide something, it would be delegated, it was all quite structured. And at Fishburn, it was quite a different philosophy. Everyone knew why they were there. We had a very clear sense of purpose. People were trusted, and you would bring, someone would just see this, put their hand up, say, I think I can do this. I've got some time. How does that sound?
Yes.
It would be a general voice, of approval. They'd go off, they'd do it, they'd share it. Other people would pitch in and it would go back. It was a much less controlled structure, much more purpose and trust and culture driven way of working. And we got, it was really interesting to me to see, 3 years into my office working career, it was really interesting to see how that unlocked people. It was an incredible place to be at the time. So it's such a great agency. But also the other big change there was suddenly I was working with these huge entities, the UK government, JP Morgan, PwC.
Wow.
It was a different kettle of fish, and I found myself having to defend companies for the first time. I find journalists trying to dig up some dirt on a financial services client to put into a trade publication. I'd never had that problem before.
Of course.
Or NGOs going after a client and trying to sort of trash them on environmental grounds. And how do you deal with that in the press? But also, how do you deal with that not just in the press, but alongside a government affairs program? So you're actually engaging with government, trying to solve the problem at the same time as dealing with the press, and really learning about integrated communications. So
yes, and I assume even with private sector clients there, I think any agency you're close, but you're always slightly removed.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a crisis or you're trying to, stop something coming out, you're having to sort of relay your plan or your message through someone else, and that must have added an extra layer of, I guess, not just complexity, but probably a bit of stress as well to, making sure. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right, and as often as not, with the more sophisticated clients, that's the point at which they would almost pull up the shutters and go, "Well, we'll just deal with this internally," which was incredibly frustrating. Because with some of the clients where they had less capacity, I was brought in to deal with this, to manage really difficult environmental reporters, like Mr. Clover when he was back at the Telegraph. And these were reporters who believed in what they were doing. They weren't going to take some tough piece. They were tough negotiations, and I find I loved that. But the bigger clients just kept that in house. And I think it was at this point that I started to realize being sword and shield of an organization, being part of the discussion, a little bit closer to it, was something that I really wanted to do more of. I love my time at Fishburn Hedges for all the reasons I mentioned.
Yes,
but it created a natural segue almost to what I thought I needed to do next.
Fishburn, went across to where you spent the vast majority of your career. So how did you get the gig, Clifford Chance? Were they a client of yours, or?
No. I mean, I guess I was having done law and probably had enough of it at university. It was calling me back in a strange way, and I'd always had friends in that world for that reason. A lot of my fellow alumni were in it, so I'd never really completely stepped away from law.
Yes.
And it seemed like an interesting place to be. And long story short, I met Anne Groves and Anna Ward, who were leading the team at the time. And Anne had been Anderson whenever it went down.
Yes.
It's a vastly experienced communicator. And I just thought, this is a firm that has a nice team and culture that I can learn a lot from, and really interesting issues, just situated in such a influence, in such a place of influence in the world of the city and finance, that this could be fun. So it was sort of interesting, good people, fun, and happily they felt the same way. So I started there, and to my massive surprise, was there for over 10 years as the role just kept changing.
Yes, and what was that like for you? I guess your first in-house gig, if you like. Huge law firm, magic circle, big reputation, great reputation, but big. Did that weigh on your shoulders at all when you first walked in the door? Or?
I don't think I knew enough to be that worried, and I'm kind of grateful for my ignorance as I went in, to be honest. Because if I'd thought about it, I probably would have been a bit more cautious. But sometimes that's a good thing. What really surprised me going in was I sort of thought, well, I've only got one client now. This is going to be really simple compared to being an agency where you're juggling 3 or 4 clients. But I very quickly learned it's like one of those fractals. So as you go in, there's just more and more detail. So suddenly I was in-house, but I still had multiple clients, and all the riches that was there. I was a level down into the relationships there, and a level up in terms of being upstream, in terms of shaping ultimately what we put out, and being part of those discussions where reputation is relevant. And the latter more over time, obviously.
Yes.
So no, it was a real eye opener in terms of the detail. I don't think it's easy to grasp that shift if you haven't worked both on the agency side and in-house. So I think I'm always interested when I see people who have done both.
Yes.
There's something else that can be understood there. So I think you learn a lot just about how organizations work. But I also felt like I was that sword and shield. I felt like I was sort of part of it. And that was a big sort of emotional shift, I think. And the third thing that was just fascinating about being in-house was the shift in attitude of the press. I realized how hard I'd been having to work before to engage and build relationships when I was that person on the side, sort of like yapping in the journalist's ear, going, come over here and talk to me. It felt like a real shift to the center almost.
Yeah, I think certainly Clifford Chance status probably definitely helped with that. I would have thought too.
I was very
it's one of those. Yeah. It's certainly one of those. It's probably one of those law firms that sort of journalists go to first for comment or first for insight, I guess, if they want to do some research or get a comment on something. For those that haven't, who listen to this, who haven't worked in legal PR, legal communications, can you describe what that typically looks like? I know it changes day to day, but just some of the foundations, some of the fundamentals.
Sure. I think it's changed since I started. So, whenever I first arrived at Clifford Chance, I think our ratio of coverage was about 1-to-1 between the legal press and broader business press. And part of the reason I was brought in was to be more city and financial focused and really push that wider business agenda. And by the time I left, I think we were at 3-to-1 or 4-to-1 ratio in favor of actual business centric press coverage, which was about issues. I like to think I played a part in that, but a big part has just been the shift in how law firms behave over time, going from being very much a professional firm to being very much a business, and there's always a balance there. But you can even see it just in where law firms were based. If you go back half a decade, a lot, and many smaller ones still are, would be based near the Inns of Court. Then in the late 80s, early 90s, suddenly you have Linklaters and Clifford Chance turning up at Barbican, so we're halfway to the city. And now you've got the US firms, Freshfields, Clifford Chance is moving back in there, right on Bishopsgate. They're right in the heart of the city. And I think that physical shift represented a psychological shift. So increasingly, being in a public relations function, a communications function for a law firm is very like any business to business public relations function. Partnerships create some different dynamics. In that you have maybe 600-700 owners with business walking around, which can create some complications when you overlay that onto the hierarchy of management. But we all work in a matrix structure to one degree or another. So what are we doing? On a good day, we are getting the news out about what services we can offer and how that's going to change the lives of our clients. In influential business press and all the other media, we've always joined up. And we're helping our people to remember why they're proud to be here and why other people should want to be here. It's in that sense, I hope is like most other business PR environments.
And it's an interesting point you make actually around the around that shift towards the business and the financial press and being closer to the city. You only have to look at most
city firms' fee book, and the amount that it's grown on the M&A and the deal side and the transactions, and there's probably legal PR has probably got a lot more in common with investment banking PR than it ever used to, for example.
I think that's absolutely right. And the other interesting parallel with investment banking is that perhaps 20 years ago, the UK-led firms had the top end of the market largely to themselves. And that has shifted, starting maybe 4 or 5 years after the credit crunch. And right up to the present day, we've seen a real step change in the engagement of the US firms in the same way that the city saw step change in US presence after the Big Bang.
Yes, it's almost mirrored, almost like for like, if you look at the growth of the US stock markets and how,
yes,
and you're right, and from about 2011, 2012, 2013, it's taken off.
And the rise of private funds, actually, even more so than the US stock markets. I mean, that's what's been driving it. But one way or another,
yes, the private credit piece is there are some very large firms now that are
but one way or another, they're yoked to the incredible power of the United States economy, which is still the dominant economy that we're exposed to. And just as the UK firms in the 80s started to consolidate and go global, as their clients went global and as the city went global, and they were part of that whole ecosystem of the city post Big Bang growing up, US firms are doing that. But from a comms point of view, that means you're in a much more dynamic market, a much more competitive market, a much more interesting market. Whether you're thinking about raising the profile of your business and being more competitive, or fighting for talent, or even just as a professional, thinking, well, what are my opportunities here? Like, what kind of jobs are out there? Like, in every respect, it's become much more dynamic, much more interesting.
Yeah. And what was that like for you from a PR and comms perspective, being, to begin with, probably more London focused, to then having a much more global outlook, and particularly suddenly working with the US media and US trade press on a more regular basis? What was that like?
Well, I was very fortunate in that I had the opportunity to work in the US on a couple of occasions for short stints, just to help out when the team was stretched. So I got to see the office there and the media firsthand, and it's different. There's a real different culture in reporting. There's a real different culture in how you engage. I think the UK, and I don't mean this pejoratively, I think the UK business reporting is a bit more tabloid. It's a bit more opinionated. That's something that US journalists can be a little bit unimpressed by, shall we say.
Okay.
So I think for me, the main thing about being out there in the US and working with people there was recognizing the very different cultures and the need to engage with those two cultures differently. That was later really helpful for me when I started working more with the teams in France and Germany and in Asia, whether that was thinking about an international project to promote the latest big thing we were talking about, whether it was Brexit or whatever, to managing issues, just recognizing and really understanding it, not just cerebrally, but really viscerally understanding that how different markets can be, even when they speak the same language. I think helps you to operate across borders in a way that's much more culturally sensitive to both colleagues and also the media that you're targeting ultimately.
Yeah. Do you have a good example of maybe one piece or one campaign where it's markedly different across territories, and I guess how you landed it? If you can think of one.
Oh gosh, I know you're asking. We're thinking back quite a long way here. I think for me the key insight, in terms of whether it's running a program or over time or a particular project, is is that in order to engage all of these sort of different cultures and people and angles, you need a bit of time. People need a bit of heads up, and it is all too easy and completely understandable why a lot of the time, in the mothership office, we'll work on something and it'll get pushed back and it'll get pushed back and it'll get pushed back, and then suddenly it's Thursday and the story's got an embargo for Monday, and you're sending out translation and pitching and everything else at the last minute. And I totally understand why these things happen, but because all of these markets are different, not just in language, but also sort of culture and approach, and what stage they're at in terms of their media relationships and their capacity to deliver, that time up front to share, like, what is the big goal here? What is the opportunity? Where are we going with this? Giving people the time to feedback so that they feel bought in and they understand it, and they can line up their partners. They can line up the media contacts and make sure that they're warm, so that when they hopefully have a good amount of time to translate it and take it out, because of that engagement and contribution, they feel a sense of ownership. Because when people own something, they're much more likely to sell it when it's getting the news out. So I think that's a sort of key insight for me. And I saw that in what we did with the launch and promotion of our tech group at Clifford Chance. I've seen it in something as simple as announcing, the annual new partners that a firm will promote. 1 year to another, where we went from perhaps less warning and less upfront consultation to more warning, more consultation. We saw a bump in coverage of about 25%. And that's a really simple piece of work. So if that's the delta on something as simple as that, how much more would it be where you need to have an expert who's bought in and feels that they want to sell it, and the PR capacity is actually there, and the PR contacts in whichever channels are warmed up. Whether you're talking about media, whether you're talking about engaging the local CBI.
And media relations, I think, actually, kind of leads on quite nicely here. We're in an increasingly digital age. We're doing this on a StreamYard. It's virtual, works well, works great. Media relations wise, how has that changed? And I guess where do you think that's going? I guess sort of both for the UK, but also internationally. Is it still a case of going back old school and still meeting a journalist for lunch or for a coffee and building relationships that way, or is it engagement through other channels, whether that's Twitter or LinkedIn or it's media databases?
No, good question. I think it's really easy to romanticize what we were doing 20 years ago and imagine that we were all spending all of our time, networking with reporters and hanging out in El Vino and
yes, and 6 pints later at the pub,
exactly, or doing the 7 p.m. run to Mount Pleasant with the those press releases that you folded up into letters, and you begging the guy at the door to chuck them into the machine even though you'd missed the deadline. But even whenever I started out, there was a lot of spam in PR. There were a lot of people just sending things out that famously went straight into the bin. The fax machine would typically in a newspaper office above the bin, and occasionally someone might rip something off and go, "Oh, this is interesting." So it's easy to overstate the extent to which we were actually really good at being relationship centered 20 years ago. And when I was at Fishburn, I remember when we did media parties and things, it was always about 10% of the people that brought in 90% of the journalists. So I don't think that's new. But the lesson that I've taken from it over time is that it's about stories, and it's about the right relationships. and we spammed people in various ways. We broadcasted, in various ways 20 years ago. And we'll continue to broadcast now using this incredible mix of media that we have. Whether it is paid media to target people that you don't have any natural exposure to, and that includes social as well as other digital channels, or the earned stuff, which can be anything from the traditional media relations to targeting content to contacts of your targets who will then like and share, and then that creates third-party endorsements. You can do some quite interesting digital strategies. Your own cohort and their social channels to your own channels, internal, external. I mean, it should all come together. And if you're really clear about what the objective is here, in terms of what is the win or loss for people, what is the story that's going to trigger them emotionally to engage with you or do something, or share it, and then you just think, okay, well, where are they at? How do I get to them? And just go for it. Those principles they're endless. They're never going to change. At the end of the day, here you've got a person who wants to achieve something, and here you've got a person who wants to achieve something, and it's about connecting the two of them with stories and media.
Yes, and then eventually you'll find out which medium each person prefers.
Exactly. I mean, the best work I've done has always been integrated. I remember working with one of our tax partners at Clifford Chance on a project where the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn had decided to tax tax massively these overseas investments into the UK, well, you're targeting offshore investors. It's very appealing. I totally get it. Unfortunately, it was probably also illegal because of bilateral investment treaties, and there was a lot to be done around that. And I was working with a partner on that, and we thought about who the investors were, where they were. We thought about what the issues were here, and we crafted a story, but we didn't just take it to the press. We took it to press. Absolutely, we took it to a client who's being attacked. And we double teamed with the client on the Today program in real time, going up before them and build that relationship that way.
Great idea.
We guest starred with all of the analysts in the city who were briefing the investors all around the world. So we went into the bulge bracket banks, which is a very strong third-party endorsement if you're trying to reach investors to explain something. And we did the media stuff and created a sort of wall of noise. Which resulted in one of the highlights. At one point, the FT was asking us for an article, which doesn't happen very often. I mean, that's definitely a moment for me.
Yeah.
The points we were putting across were being used on the front benches of Parliament and also at the Labour Party conference. Clients were coming directly to us, bypassing all of the usual procurement gateways, looking for support. The new clients, I should stress. And at the end of the day, the policy went away. The policy became unsustainable. I'm not pretending that we were the only part in that. We were definitely part of that discussion. But that wouldn't have worked if we'd just gone for a few media hits.
A few media hits. Send a press release out. Maybe try and get a bit of trade press coverage. You've got to think, who the end audience is, kind of who the target audience is. What do they look at? What do they read? Where are they? And then hitting every single possible point on that journey. And also, and thinking outside the box as well, because I'm sure there'll be elements of what you did there that you would never have been shown something like that agency side, or you were very unlikely to have necessarily been trained in doing some of those things, right? You've got to think outside the box and thought a bit differently.
A little bit. I mean, I will say I was very lucky in that Fishburn Hedges was ahead of the game when it came to integrated joined up thinking. Some of the teams I sat on had a public affairs guy and an internal comms specialist and a media relations hack like myself. Each team was constructed, or a digital communications expert, or a report writer, whatever.
Got it.
Each team was completely bespoke. So I I had never seen anything quite like this, but the basic principles were there. Elon Musk, I think, has a point here. There are many points he has that I don't agree with, but he talks about first principles thinking. It's like, take it right back to, okay, I'm going to build this rocket. What are the materials? What do they cost? How can we put it together?
Yes.
And in a similar way, if you come back to because you're starting in what I do in professional services with an asymmetry of expertise, so that you figured out someone out there is going to win or lose. What are they going to win or lose? That's usually a simple story, which gives you a good start for a story. And then it's a case of, okay, well, who are these people and what are their watering holes? Where do they sit? And then it's, okay, and how do we get to those watering holes?
Yeah.
Whether that is a trade body or the analysts or the media they read, it could be anything. It could be anything. And it is that first principles thinking that will unlock that. But most of the time, doing what you normally do is the best thing to do. But you don't want to be doing this every time. But for the big bets, the really interesting ones, first principles thinking is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, really great example, actually. And I think a lot of people will take we'll take note of that and probably try and copy you.
Well,
you're a thought leader, Michael. That's it. You're a thought leader. Yeah.
I just say I've been very lucky to work with people who are that smart. I mean, I feel hugely privileged to have been able to be in a job where I get to talk about a vast range of things with people who are much, much cleverer than me. From a platform that people want to listen to. And being able to shift those public discussions and debates, whether it's that or in my first 2 years at Clifford Chance was explaining the credit crunch to the world and what all the G20 summits meant. And I feel incredibly lucky to have done that. So I'm very much standing on the shoulders of giants here.
Yeah. What was the a question I want to ask? Because normally I ask everyone who's their favorite CEO or their favorite partner they've worked for. But actually, I'm going to change the question a little bit here. Because I think what you just said around working very bright people, clearly the caliber of lawyers and partners at Clifford Chance, they're incredibly bright. What was that like, acting as PR counsel to lawyers whose job it is to counsel clients on legal issues? Was that a bit of a sparring match sometimes? Is that
it was one of the things that it was brilliant and terrifying. It was brilliant because you had these minds that you work with, these people that could just help to unlock discussions and debates and help to make sense of the world through our third-party endorsement, just help to make everything clearer. However, it is also a building full of critical thinkers, and so you very often get the question why, and that doesn't always happen with in my previous role where I'd been working with marketing departments who kind of got it and just wanted to get on with it more of the time. But that was interesting because I suddenly had to go in even more prepared than usual. And I think it's a good discipline to think about what you do and to be able to explain it to someone who doesn't do it all the time, because it makes you understand what you're doing a bit better. So I'm really grateful actually for all of the questions I got over the years. And I remember certainly my first year, I remember some of the questions being quite frustrating, but looking back, I learned so much from partly the questions being asked. And also when you're dealing with really senior people who've been at the top of the business for 20 years, they know a lot about how things will play out. So they might not be an media expert, but if you're dealing with an issue, they know how these things play out. And by listening to those challenges and engaging with them and being prepared to give and take on both sides is important.
Yes.
You could end up with a much better product. So it was terrifying, but it made me learn a lot. And I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. And what was it like? Tell me if I'm wrong here, but I'd say most lawyers tend to be slightly more risk averse than risk takers.
This is true.
PR people, on the other hand, particularly with agency training, you've just got to get out there, just got to do it. What was that like, convincing more risk-averse people to take a chance and trust you?
Well, it's two things. So I think initially, when you get in there and you're starting to work on something, and I was coming in at quite an early stage to try and do this finance and city journalism relations that
Yes.
the firm hadn't really been doing before. But you start with the people who are intrinsically motivated, so they're perhaps a little bit less risk averse, and you start to sort of build up their profile. And then once you've created that momentum, there's always a little bit of green-eyed jealousy, kind of like, why are they getting all this exposure? And then sort of take the next tier down. And now that they've got that intrinsic motivation, you go, okay, so like, I know where you're coming from. We don't want to create any unnecessary risk, because the downside is huge. But it's a case of starting small, I always think. We've learned so much over the last 20 years from behavioural science about what works and what doesn't work, in terms of everything from making a story to driving behaviour change. My favourite way of talking about this with people is very often to refer to Duolingo and how it gamifies learning language. How does Duolingo get you to do something that's a bit scary and intimidating? Because trying to speak another language is scary and intimidating. And what does it do? It makes it easy. It makes it a bit fun. And it kind of nags you, and it celebrates. So your cycle is a little nag to do something. It's going to be easy, so you're much more likely to do it. You do it, you feel good about it, because that thing that you were given was at the right level for you. So you feel good already. You then get praised for it, so you feel even better. And then you get, a nice result, and that gets shared more widely. And suddenly there's you're looking good in a pure context, and then you're back to the next stage. That's the sort of Duolingo cycle. And that's the same cycle of taking someone from curious but risk averse to actually really natural and confident, and they get it. I remember with one of the regulatory lawyers, who wasn't a partner at the time. One of the regulatory lawyers said, Clifford Chance, he wanted to start raising his profile. And we sat down and he talked about this exciting new regulatory initiative. It didn't sound very exciting. As we workshopped it a little bit, and I was explaining to him, you don't need to change anything here. This is all great. But let's just give them some language. Journalists love language. Let's just give them some language that they can, when they hear it, they'll light up. Something that's visual, sort of stimulate the senses, even though they're words. So it was a cliche, but I just said, okay, so the European Union is firing the starting gun on whatever. And he took that on board, and he took a couple of other points away from it. And next week, front page story in FTFM, as was then at the time. And that was the pull quote. Picture of him, pull quote of this, this huge new regulatory thing coming out. It's going to unlock loads of capital to drive private lending to businesses as banks retreated post credit crunch. And those little wins like that, they just create those cycles.
And almost writing the journalist headline for them as well. Sort of saves them a job. And
it sort of comes back to what is a story, and you've got to.
What's the hook?
There's always layers, but there's got to be a simple layer, and that's simple because we come back to behavioral science again. We know people don't want to think, and what I mean by that is Daniel Kahneman's system 1, system 2. The system, the complicated thinking, the system 2 stuff, like 732 times 450. If I give the option of 2 marshmallows and that sum, or 1 marshmallow, most people will take the 1 marshmallow. They don't want to do it. So give them a simple story. And we also know about priming people. You buy a new car, you buy a Mini, say. Suddenly you'll notice all the Minis because you've been primed. So you've got to think about, okay, people are trying to reach, what are they already primed about? and you sort of shape the story towards that priming. And then you've got to make it emotive, because if you're not reading it and feeling something, you're not processing it. If you're not processing it, then someone like that is not going to process it. So the emotion is critical. Like, there was a famous case study of a guy who he had a brain injury and it separated the emotional processing from the rational processing in the brain. People thought, will he become a genius? Will he become a sort of savant, a sort of data type figure from Star Trek? Not what happened. He just couldn't make any decisions. And so very often in what we do, because we're dealing with such clever people, they want to be clever about it. And sometimes
you just need to do the simple thing, right?
It's not dumbing it down, but okay, but why would someone care? Like, what's the win or the loss here? And getting that emotion there, that's what's going to nudge them into reading it or sharing it or giving you a call or instructing you.
Yeah, just trying not to overthink it sometimes is You
can get back to like simple, salient, and emotive. You've usually got a story that will work. And will work in the media, in direct channels, in pitches. It's about connecting one brain to another, like we were saying earlier. And stories are the most powerful way of doing that.
Yeah, great. Normally my final question is, if there was one thing about communications, what would you change? But again, I'm going to change it for you, Michael. Because I know you love your technology and you've got an interest in it. If you had to choose one thing or one way, how do you think technology is going to transform communications over the next few years?
Well, I want to talk about two things, but I'll respect the question.
No. Go on. Okay. 2 things. Let's go. Yeah.
Okay. Headline point. For me, I think there's two really interesting shifts happening in technology. One is AI, and one is the ability to work remotely and do what we're doing here. And I think they both affect how we work and how we deliver on what we do. So with AI, like, already I've used AI to generate like extensive communications packs, and we'll be able to use it to capture tone of voice and do all kinds of clever things. So I think AI in the short term will be a huge amplifier. In the long term, I struggle to imagine. I think anyone who tells you they know what AI is going to be doing for us in 5 years or 10 years is lying. But Bill Gates said it, that we usually overestimate what will happen in 2 years and underestimate in 10 years. I think that's what's going to be like here. Next couple of years, we'll be amplifying what we do. 10 years, who knows? But that's something we're going to have to sit on all the time to make sure we are making the most of it and we're keeping pace in terms of how we work. In terms of how we deliver, suddenly we have a new channel. Like, all of our stories to date have been pretty static. It might be a video, but it's still static. Suddenly, we can deliver a story through a bot, maybe. That's internal communications or external communications. That information, if we can stop it from hallucinating, that information can be contextual right down to the individual and interactive about what they care about right now. So that point I was making earlier about 3 elements of story: simple, salient, and emotive. What's salient changes from day to day, and if you're delivering story through some kind of bot, figure that out and walk right into it with the best possible pitch. I think that's really interesting. And on the tech transition and workplace front, it's as a team leader, it's like, how do we preserve culture here? But as a comms guy, I'm also thinking, okay, well, how do we preserve the culture of a larger organization? We're spending less time together. The importance of having a really clear sense of mission or purpose in an organization.
Yes.
What the strategy is for pursuing that, and what my individual role is in that. Much more important. And there's a huge opportunity for us working with leaders to really try to make sure we've got clarity on that, make sure it's simple enough to live in people's heads and not in a desk drawer somewhere, if anyone has desk drawers anymore, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do, yeah.
Because without that sense of a bigger story, all these scattered people be more likely to pull apart. This is what Harari talks about in *Sapiens*. You grow beyond 150 people by having these institutions and these bigger stories build nation states or kingdoms. And companies are the same. And I think there's a really important role for us to be asking, do we have a good story beyond we want to be a really good business at what we do, that will bring people together, even though they're maybe not seeing each other more than once or twice a month.
But it's been absolutely wonderful having you on, Michael. And just before we go, is there anything you'd like to plug? Is there any any sort of upcoming events you're going to, or speaking things, or anything you'd like to
now you're asking.
Like anything you'd like to mention?
No, I mean, I'm definitely, I've been away over the summer in France. I've been very fortunate just to have some time out, and I've been reconnecting with people a lot. But since I got back, so next week I'm heading to a thought leadership conference just to brush up, really, because I mean, I've been working on this stuff for years, but I think however long we've been around, it's really important for us all to be continuously learning. Whether that is at a conference like that, or as I was talking about earlier, from your internal clients, from lawyers, to learn stuff about communication there or wherever. So I'm really focused on brushing up my skills as things like AI grow, and things like these tech transition, different ways of working come in, as the ESG transition gets going. There's so many things for us to learn, and which again is the things that makes doing this job so interesting.
Great, sounds fun, and the thought leadership thing next week, I'm sure will be really exciting. So,
hope so.
Enjoy.
Well, I'll maybe see you there.
Oh yeah. Anyway, super. Look, it's been absolutely lovely having you on. And thank you very much, Michael. I'll obviously tag you in all the promo for this too. So, looking forward to kind of hearing people's comments and thoughts. And I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Look forward to continuing the conversation, Max. Thank you for having me.
Smashing. No worries. Cheers, Michael. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.